Welcome to another Foreign Press USA talk. I'm Isabel Suarez, an associate reporter for the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents, and I would like to welcome Anne Corpet, French correspondent and U.S. Bureau Chief of RFI. She's a member of the Washington, D.C. podcast, which gathers various Francophone correspondents to share insight about everything happening at the White House, especially during last year's election. So thank you so much, Anne, for joining us today. I'm so excited to hear a little bit about your story and just talk about your experience as a correspondent in the US.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first thing that I would like to ask you is, how was that process like for you to move to the US and become a White House correspondent for RFI?
Well, that was a long waiting list. I mean, first time I wanted to be there for years. I did apply 2 times before having the chance to move here. And during all those years, I've been reporting in the US, but only for short periods. So I was really excited when I knew that this time it was for good. I was leaving Paris and settled down in DC. And so I arrived during summer 2017. And I was supposed to begin my job on September 1st, but then a hurricane came in and Houston, Texas was flooded. So a few days after my arrival, I hadn't even depacked my stuff. I had to jump on a flight and begin the great American adventure.
Wow, that is just such a great way to start things off. I mean, so fast, and you having to cover such a huge story.
Yeah, that was
I'm
great. I didn't have to think about what should I do, how to handle the politics stories. I just had to wear boots, take my, radio recorder and go, and that was easier for me.
That's really interesting because, I mean, you have been working with RFI since 1996, I believe, covering current affairs in general. So, what would you say were some of the highlights of your trajectory with RFI?
Well, first, let me tell you, I enjoyed it all the way. I was a reporter for more than 10 years. That means I was covering quite any kind of thing, wars, political crises, natural catastrophes all around the world, but also demonstrations in the streets of Paris. And I really liked, not to know what would happen the day after. You wake up in the morning and you end up the day in a flight for Jerusalem or anywhere. And that was really exciting. But then during that process, I also had 2 kids. And one day, I guess it was in 2005, I had a phone call. I was on holidays with my kids and husband, and they wanted me to go straight away to New Orleans for Katrina. And I said, well, I'm in Italy, there's a swimming pool, and maybe you should send a new young reporter because, sometimes in any news paper or radio, you have the kind of the reporter of the moment that is sent all over the place. And you have other people who are also entitled to cover any kind of story. So I was that girl at the moment, there's this straight thought about me. And I said, well, no, it's going to be hard. And then when I came back, well, they sent someone else who was great. We did a wonderful job. And in fact, she's my boss now. And when I came back, I thought, well, maybe if you're not ready to quit everything just to take a flight, it's time to, go easy on reporting. So I became editor-in-chief. I was the head of the international service of RFI for like 10 years, and it was great as well because uh, I was sending great reporters all over the world, and I had a more, view from outside. It's like a de-zoom on the world affair, and that was pretty interesting. But then I felt like, I want to go back on the ground. And so I arrived here and it was perfect.
That is really interesting because you got the perspective of being a reporter on the field, but also being an editor and, coaching other reporters who would, cover these great stories. So, what would you say were some of these like key differences for you to, be on the outside looking in and also just you becoming a reporter? Like, which one would you say was one that you liked more, or one that, I don't know, you felt more comfortable with?
Well, depending on the team, of course. I had a great team at the International Service of RFI, so it was great. But I'd say the experience that I had here in DC was definitely the, the, the best for mixing all those experiences as a reporter and as an editor-in-chief, because I know what they expect, I know the needs of the radio, and I was in a position where I was able to propose before my boss actually asked me for anything, because I knew what their needs are. So instead of waiting for them to ask me, well, would you do a story about this and that? I was always eager to say, well, I have this story or that story. Which one would you like me to cover? And so in that way, I would always cover the stories that interest me the most, but it's good to have both position, and both are very important.
I think one of the interesting things of you being a correspondent in the US and working for RFI is that it is a public radio in French, so many countries are listening to you. What would you say were some of the major topics, for example, in the last few months, that people were interested in listening in the radio about the US?
So RFI is a worldwide public radio, and it has like 40 millions of listeners all around the world, but most of them are living in French-speaking countries, and most of those countries are in Africa. So of course, my audience was very, very interested in all the Black Lives Matter movement, the demonstration after George Floyd's death, and uh, and so that, and also all the story related to the Afro-Americans, like how the Afro-Americans are more affected by the COVID, for example, and how you have such some initiative, like people getting vaccinated in barbershops or stuff like that, and that works very well. And I have lots of listeners who write me about those stories. But generally speaking, we also have French, of course, who are listening to RFI. And the French people are very interested in American politics. And of course, as the rest of the world, they were fascinated in a way by Trump, the, the man, and the way he did exert power. And so, of course, every tweet, every, crisis was to cover. Because I must add something, why Europeans are so fascinated with America. It's, I guess, because what is happening here in the US often end up to happen too in Europe, movement like Black Lives Matter, or other things like, I don't know, the gay marriage, the ability of being a spouse when you're from a same-sex community. That fight began here in the US, and we have now the same-sex wedding too in France, but it came after that had happened in the US. But, and some other things, like I think is crime studies, existing in the US for many years now, is beginning in France too. I mean, you see a rise of opioid addictions in France. So it's always interesting to take a good look on what's happening because it may land in Europe as well.
No, yeah, that's so interesting how one topic, for example, that is just blown up in the US really affects other parts of the world. So like you were saying, Europe or even Africa, the whole situation with Black Lives Matter movement and how that affected people over there. So I wanted to actually talk a little bit about politics. You are part of Washington, D.C., and this podcast, you're with a lot of other Francophone correspondents. I believe Sonia Dridi, she was also part of the Foreign Press Correspondents talk over here. So it was really nice to hear a little bit of her insight about the podcast, but I would like to know a little bit about your insight. How is it different for you who are always working with radio, which is a lot about listening and the voice, and definitely it's very, very particular, particularly similar with podcast production. So I wanted to know a little bit about your perspective of how it was like to join with other people who talk about, Washington and current affairs, especially politics in the U.S. How is it like interesting? How was that dynamic between all of you talking about a topic that was just so current and popular?
It was great. It was a great, friendly adventure. First, it was nice for me to learn a new way of communicating because, I've been doing radio for more than 2 years, and suddenly you learn something new with the podcast. It's a new way of expressing yourself, more natural. You don't write what you say. You just interact with all those four friends now. We became friends, of course, and it was fun as well. And it was very interesting to confront our perspective, our point. We could have different. We would insert some of our reports in the podcast. So it was very rich, one of us could have gone somewhere, I don't know, in Minnesota for speaking with farmers, when the other was in Florida, and suddenly at the end of the week, we would mix that different experience, and it was very cool to have more insight of what was going on in this country, especially in a period during the campaign where the political tensions were so high, and even, of course, after the elections. So it was as if we were reporting more, like when Sonia would have gone to, what she was in Wilmington on the election night, I was in DC, and then when she talked about it, I was, stunned because, give me the real perspective that she had over there. And when someone else could be in with the Trumpers, and suddenly we're all together and we share this material. So that's a surprise, but success of this because
In a recent article published by Foreign Press USA, you have shared that in the US it is easier to approach people about politics and the government in general. I was wondering, do you think it is easy for this to happen? Is it very different from, for example, your experience in France or other countries that you've covered?
yes, I think American people are trained from an early age to express themselves. There is this freedom of speech which is deeply inside any American citizen. And also at school, people are taught from an early age to express themselves publicly as in France, you have at school teachers who tell the kids to stay put, stay quiet, and listen to the teacher. You know, it's an old-fashioned way of teaching. So when you are a reporter in the US, it's really easy. I mean, you can ask anyone in the street. Nobody is first shy, afraid of a microphone. Um, and everybody is eager to tell what he has to say, whatever it is. I mean, on any subject, and especially on politics, while covering Trump's mandate, which was very, divisive. Everybody wanted to say, "Oh, I love President Trump," or "Oh, I hate President Trump," and they all wanted to let you know why they loved him so much or why they hated him so much. And I think it was maybe easier for a foreign correspondent to speak with all Trump supporters because, you know, when you were covering Trump's meeting, you always hear those fake news media stuff and how CNN was bad, how MSNBC was bad. And then when you know, talk to people when the meeting is over, they ask you, "Are you from the fake news media?" And you say, "Oh no, I'm French. You know, I just want to understand why you love your president so much. Explain me." And then suddenly they were very friendly and very happy to share their perspective on his presidency and about the man as well. So I get, oh, sorry. So it's really a very easy country for being a reporter. And yeah, I did appreciate that a lot. And the other thing is, when you ask someone in the street to to answer any question, they always have a good punchline, which is very convenient for a radio reporter.
Oh yeah, I imagine it must be so interesting to, talk to people on streets, and then you say that you're from another country, and they are more open to, express their feelings and their opinions, which is, I think, something amazing, right, for a reporter and a correspondent to share that news coverage with your country or your radio station, for example. But at last, I just wanted to ask you for a word of advice for all these young journalists who expect to become a foreign correspondent in the future. What would you say is the primary thing that you have to do, or some word of advice from your personal experience, which is so extensive, about being a correspondent and what is the best way to do that?
Enjoy it and out of DC more often than you can, because America is much more than Washington, D.C. Of course, it's great, and I loved it to go to the White House, to go to the Congress. It's easy to ask a senator or a representative in the Congress. You know, you just have to hold your microphone, ask them a question. Don't tell them you're not American. Just ask the question. They will answer. But then you gotta go to the country. You gotta meet the farmers in the Midwest. You gotta meet the people from Florida, Arkansas, Oklahoma, anywhere. All those flyover states, as they are called, are full of Americans too. You know, you don't have to just go to the East Coast or the West Coast, because that's how the media couldn't see that Trump would be the president in 2016, maybe because they were listening to, more of the people around them in big cities, on the coasts. And I guess you have to pierce this country, which is so big. You have to travel a lot and meet the more people that you can. And they all are so friendly, whatever their opinion is. You always will be welcome. Just introduce yourself, be nice, and enjoy your time.
Well, I think those are some really valid points. And thank you so much, Anne, for your time and for just your insight about your story as a correspondent, as a radio host and reporter. I just really, really am excited to be a part of this conversation with you.
Thank you very much for having me. And unfortunately, my mandate is over. I will go back to France this summer, but I'm sure going to be back here very shortly because